Hey people, Starlight Speedster here with a new video, and today I wanted to take a look at Hilariously Scary's video titled My OC Was a Mary Sue, How I Fixed Her Speed Paint. So, I've watched the first 3 or so minutes of this video. Basically, Scary here explains how she originally had an OC who was described as a Mary Sue and how she thinks describing OCs as a Mary Sue is bad. And I wanted to break it down. Like I said, I stopped around the 3 minute mark so I could do the rest of the video with a more fresh perspective. Because, I think there are some things I agree with, but also some things I disagree with. So, let's get into it.
I'm going to go on another rant about how the concept of a Mary Sue is a really toxic concept that shouldn't be perpetuated and only stifles creativity and does overall nothing productive. Because it worked out so well the last time. Greetings here, it is I, Hilariously Scary, and today I'm going to be talking about my personal beliefs on the concept of a...
Oh, so she made a rant about Mary Sue's last time. Maybe I should do that too. But man, I'm not going to bother covering that right now. I should probably cover that one first. You know what? Why not? I'll cover this. I'll cover that one first since she ranted about it the first time, and then my next video will be covering this one. So yeah, let's do it. Mary Sue's aren't bad. Oh boy. Surprised the dislike ratio isn't worse, but make more Mary Sue's? That's a bit of a weird thing. I agree not to stifle creativity, but why would you want to make Mary Sue's? Whatever, let's check this out first.
Greetings, viewer. It is I, Hilariously Scary, and yes, you read that title right. I think that people should make more Mary Sue's. I don't have very much time, and this argument is not laid out logically or in any way. It's just a bunch of points, and I'm just gonna yell them. Let's just get started. First off, I think that, and it's not just me thinking this, so this has been shown several times, anything can be done right. So even the most boring characters and the most boring plot can be done right if you do it right. But then on the opposite side, anything can also...
And she doesn't explain why One Punch Man is an example. As in, let's take a look at what exactly she said.
Right. So even the most boring characters and the most boring plot can be done right if you do...
Most boring characters and most boring plot can be done right. And she uses One Punch Man as an example. Okay, so I have seen Season 1. I have not seen Season 2, but most people, when they think of One Punch Man, I'm pretty sure that they are thinking about Season 1 anyway, so whatever. Okay, so boring plot. Kind of. I mean, the plots are formulaic, but that's only a problem if you don't like the individual plot lines. And as for characters being boring, maybe you could make an argument with Saitama, and I guess Genos, however you pronounce it, since he is just sort of the archetypal anime shonen action anime hero. But how can you say that about characters like Tatsumaki or Speed of Sound Sonic? You can't. Those characters have a lot of energy and personality to them. So, boring plot, I guess so, but then you've also got, things like that. What do you call him? The Deep Sea King, and how he was wreaking havoc, and then you had that fantastic scene with Moomin Rider, who I almost forgot is also a pretty great character. How he's, how he's basically this loser who would just keep fighting no matter what. Yeah, so, outside of Saitama and Genos, These characters have a lot of energy and personality to them, and the plots, while by no means exceptional, are still entertaining. And I apologize if I am speaking in generally. It has been a while since I watched One Punch Man season 1. I just remember some stuff like how the stuff with Boros was cool, but that's kind of it. But I can explain why One Punch Man doesn't really fit the example Scary puts out. But even if I did agree, she doesn't go into any sort of detail. So we already have a glaring hole in this video. It's bad enough that the whole, that the claim she is founding the video on is pretty controversial and unpopular, but now she isn't even explaining her argument.
Right. But then on the opposite side, anything can also be done wrong. So even the most interesting characters and the most interesting plot can just be absolutely terrible. And I think that main thing is the main point with Mary Sue's. A lot of people, they're seeing these like characters that are actually like really cool characters, incredible characters, but they're not executed right, and so they just label it, oh, that's a Mary Sue. And the thing is, there's nothing productive about labeling something as a Mary Sue. We have in this art community this concept of this character that is just the absolute worst, and we named it Mary Sue. But if you ask 10 different people,
hold on, what?
Community, this concept of this character that is just the absolute worst, and we named it Mary Sue.
So this concept of a character that is the absolute worst and called it Mary Sue? Am I hearing this right?
We have in this art community this concept of this character that is just the absolute worst, and we named it Mary Sue.
That is so wrong. Oh man, that is so wrong. Okay, let's take a look at why she is wrong. So there's this video from Overly Sarcastic Productions. I won't show the entire thing, but basically, Red talks about how the origins of a Mary Sue and how it was originally done in a Star Trek fan fiction. And that is what we are referring to as Mary Sue.
Be treated as unbiased, but still, it seems like any established definition ropes in too many characters that we don't want it to apply to. So how do we unravel the mystery of the Mary Sue? Who is she? Well, we should probably start at the beginning. Let's indulge in a little bit of fandom archaeology and travel all the way back to 1973. Mary Sue was coined as a parody/dissection of this trope in its original form. She was a comically over-the-top self-insert character in a Star Trek fanzine, and I'd summarize, but it'd be easier to just read the first paragraph. Gee golly gosh glorioski, thought Mary Sue as she stepped on the bridge of the Enterprise. Here I am, the youngest lieutenant in the fleet, only 15 and a half years old. Captain Kirk came up to her. Oh, Lieutenant, I love you madly. Will you come to bed with me? Captain, I am not that kind of girl. You're right, and I respect you for it. Here, take over the ship for a minute while I go get some coffee for us. Mr. Spock came onto the bridge. What are you doing in the command seat, Lieutenant? The captain told me to. Flawlessly logical. I admire your mind. See, at the time, this was a lot of what fanfiction was. People wanted to ride along with all these wacky adventures, which, fair, so they drop a character into the world and wish fulfill the hell out of it. Our buddy Mary Sue is gorgeous, talented, and desired and or respected by everybody. She's better than everyone at what they do, but nobody's mad about it because she's just so amazing. But none of that is why we dislike her. No, we find her annoying because the story is empty. This version of Mary Sue takes the spotlight and prima donnas her way through an otherwise fascinating fictional universe. This is just pure wish fulfillment. She's a backstoryless bundle of positive character traits with nothing behind the eyes, and the story's no fun unless you like pretending to be her, because the story is entirely centered on people reaffirming how great she is. Now this was the Gen 1 Mary Sue. The original, shameless, girls just want to have...
Okay, so again, I won't get into the whole thing. You can watch the full video if you'd like, link in the description. But yes, this is the origin of the Mary Sue. It originally came from a Star Trek fan fiction. So what Scary here is saying is flat out wrong.
But if you ask 10 different people, they can all be like writers, or like they can all be comic creators, or they can all be like of the same type of artist, and you ask them what a Mary Sue is, I guarantee you are gonna get different answers. You are not gonna get a uniform answer.
Source? Oh, you're not going to provide one. Okay.
Because we're all so scared to create Mary Sues, but none of us actually know what a Mary Sue is. In order to start off this argument, and I guess
Then why don't we look at a dictionary definition then, if we don't know what a Mary Sue is? Mary Sue, originally in fanfiction, a type of female character who is depicted as unrealistically lacking in flaws or weaknesses. There you go. There is a myth. That is your definition of a Mary Sue.
I already started it off, but you need to define Mary Sue. What is a Mary Sue?
What I just said, but okay, enough of me interrupting and being an a-hole about it. Okay, let's hear what you have to say here.
And the thing is, I could give a definition and somebody's going to disagree with me. But when you break it down to the most basic, a Mary Sue is anything that is a bad character. So basically what you're...
Again, source, do you have your own source for this definition, or was this something you just made up? I'm sorry if I sound really, really cynical here, but, you haven't really left a good first impression so far. Maybe this is why you unlisted it? I don't know. Maybe I'll find out once I, take a look at this. I probably should have written out a better argument. Yeah, you're telling me based off the 2 minutes I've looked at so far, but hopefully you get the idea.
You're saying to these people, when you say don't make Mary Sues, you're saying don't make a bad character.
Well, it's not as simple as just don't make a bad character. It's also make a character with realistic flaws and is relatable. I mean, a good character, in theory, a character can still be, down to earth and relatable, but then still be, absolutely horrible and terribly written. So it's not just as simple as, oh, if you're saying, this character is a Mary Sue, you just mean that they are a bad character. I mean, okay, that's technically right, but they're not the same thing. Wait, what were you trying to say?
Saying to these people, when that is a bad character. So basically what you're saying to these people, when you say don't make Mary Sues, you're saying don't make a bad character.
Okay, I think I didn't quite understand what you were saying. So when you say don't make a Mary Sue, you are saying don't make a bad character. Like I said, they're not quite the same thing. When you say don't make a Mary Sue, you mean don't make them super overpowered. But when you say don't make a bad character, you mean don't make a bad character in general. Now, generally, Mary Sues are considered bad characters, so let me put it to you like this. If someone says don't make a Mary Sue, they are saying don't make a bad character, but if they are saying don't make a bad character, that doesn't necessarily mean they are saying don't make a Mary Sue, unless I am misunderstanding you and what you are simply trying to say is the former, with how whenever someone says don't make a Mary Sue, what they really mean is don't make a bad character. I just confused myself. Ugh.
To which I reply, no, duh. We have this Mary Sue, this concept that's scaring these kids half to death from creating characters because they're so scared that it's going to be a Mary Sue. But here's my thing. Any character created by anybody who is not experienced creating characters is a Mary Sue. It's inevitable. Unless there's some sort of character creating prodigy, every character that you create, your first character is a Mary Sue.
Um, eh, um, what source do you have? Again, I need sources here. Do you have proof that every single character created is a Mary Sue? Because unless you have proof, then why should I just believe you? Now, I get what you're trying to say. What you're trying to say here is that if you're someone who is really passionate about creating characters, then at some point, unless you're someone with a lot of experience, then chances are you will make a Mary Sue at one point or another. It just happens, you know? Basically, these people want to get creative and then they end up making their characters super duper overpowered, or they're just not very good, but that's kind of to be expected when they are starting off. And if that is the crux of your argument, then I would agree.
Because if we go back to that definition of Mary Sue basically just being a bad character, and I didn't really define that well, because like basically when people say Mary Sue, they're like, oh well, she's the center of or the story, or she or he, which isn't necessarily a bad thing.
Oh, okay, so she does bring it up. Well, I guess this is what happens when you sort of do this sort of a live reaction, folks. Earlier responses end up making you look like a dunce.
They are overpowered, which isn't necessarily a bad thing.
Thank you.
They have a really awful rainbow exciting design, which isn't necessarily a bad thing.
Thank you.
Because the thing is, it goes back to that anything can be done right and anything can be done wrong. And when you first start out, you don't know how to do anything right, so you do everything wrong, which makes your character a bad character, even though it could be like a really cool character. I've seen really awesome concepts of characters that have just been labeled as Mary Sue's. They just put this Mary Sue stamp on it and then move on. And you don't, it's like if you stamp something as a Mary Sue, you like stamp out all its potential. Because in my opinion,
Yeah, and to add upon this, characters, when you're writing characters, they're not going to start off well written. This kind of stuff, it takes time. It takes practice. It takes lots of feedback over the years. You're not going to grasp it right away, so it's unrealistic to expect a character to suddenly be, amazingly well written if it's someone's first character. So it's just sort of, oh wow, this character is well written. I cannot speak. Wow, this character is badly written. Well, yes, it was the first one that this person made, so I'm not entirely sure what you expected.
they just put this Mary Sue stamp on it and then move on. And you don't, it's like if you stamp something as a Mary Sue, you like stamp out all its potential. Because
Yeah, when you say, I agree with that. When you label something as a Mary Sue, you kind of, you're kind of just sort of not looking at, I guess, the sort of intentions that go behind it, what the person is trying to go for. If you just say, oh, they're a Mary Sue, end of story, then you're just kind of, I feel as if that's a bit too dismissive to just say, oh, it's a Mary Sue, and to not give a deeper analysis to the character and what the creator may have been going for.
in my opinion, improvement is inevitable. If a kid creates a character, it's most likely going to be a Mary Sue, because when a kid creates a character, they want to create like an awesome version of themselves and their friends. That's like pretty much how almost every character starts out. It's just a self-insert, but like way more awesome.
And I would like one thing I would like to add is that I feel that in the case of the art community, this 100% applies. These aren't official characters. These are just things people are making in their spare time. In which case, let them have fun. Let them make Mary Sue's if they enjoy doing it. It's what they enjoy doing. I'm not saying to just eat it up and pretend as if it's amazing. Just to let them have fun with what they're doing. As long as you are respectful with your criticisms. If you are respectful with your criticisms, then, sure. But I think that Mary Sue is a bit of a lazy criticism, because it just sort of, it doesn't really help with the feedback. What am I supposed to get from someone if they tell me that a character is a Mary Sue? Dive into, dive into what the creator's intentions were, and give them specific feedback on how they could, improve upon their vision. But in the case of, official media where words like Mary Sue are thrown around, I feel as if that could be considered different because, you know, um, in the case of official products, you are paying for this and you expect the writing to be higher quality since it is coming from more experienced writers. So, obviously things like, when you call a character from an official production like Rey from Star Wars a Mary Sue, then, you can't really apply the whole improvement argument onto those characters because you can't apply that because, again, it's an official production, more experienced writers, so you would expect them to avoid these beginner traps. Um, but even in the case of official productions, I feel as if it's kind of misused in the sense that it's just sort of used on any character that is very powerful. In fact, maybe we should go back to overly sarcastic productions because, I know I brought up Rey earlier, but I actually don't agree with what people said about Rey and Star Wars The Force Awakens.
Would do, and Lucas would love it. But obviously, I mean, Luke heavily based on George's unrealistic. Alright, what the is a Mary Sue? Seriously, the term gets thrown around all over the goddamn place, but what does it mean? Nobody can agree. Some people say a Mary Sue is any character who's unrealistically heroic and or powerful, but that definition also covers basically every hero, so clearly it's too broad. Sometimes it's restricted to author inserts, but there's nothing stopping a writer from writing a perfectly harmless author avatar into the story. Iconic hero Luke Skywalker has been explicitly confirmed to be heavily based on George Lucas himself, if this didn't already give it away. Mark Hamill has even gone on record to say that when he was stumped on how to play a scene, he'd just default to whatever Lucas would do, and Lucas would love it.
Okay, so here, Red, does a better job explaining the different definitions people tend to use, but I don't think she used any sources to prove this stuff, so I'll have to look it up later and see if I can confirm any of this stuff with Luke Skywalker apparently being George Lucas's self-insert, but, if it's the way I see it, there's nothing wrong with writing a character based off of your own personal experiences. In fact, those can be the most interesting at points because everyone has a story to tell. So there's nothing wrong. And I feel like things like, self-insert complaints are kind of, that it's their own way of, it's a way of sort of discouraging creativity. Same with Mary Sue's to an extent, because it's just saying, oh, well, don't make them super overpowered and that will fix everything. But as they get into with the Trope Talk video, the problem is it's more so a story problem. And I know I brought up the dictionary definition, but, if you want to talk about unrealistically lacking in flaws or weaknesses, what about Saitama? I know that they explained it with the whole things about him working out to achieve that point, but, even in universe, they look at those feats and think that it's ridiculous that he could achieve those powers through simply working out. If that doesn't sound unrealistic, I don't know what does. And this might be a bit of an unpopular opinion, but I would argue Batman could technically be considered a bit of a Mary Sue or Gary Stu himself. And, again, there's another video on Rey and whether or not she's a Mary Sue, and the guy says that, it can be excused if it's explained through backstory, But what if the backstory is super duper ridiculous? I already brought up Zaitan, but okay, here's the idea I have off the top of my head. So you have this guy, he's super duper weak, but he wants to improve his childhood crush. Gwen, Stacy, Jane Watson, Leia, Skywalker. And then what he does is that, he bumps into Arnold Schwarzenegger, and then Schwarzenegger looks at him saying, "What, you think you're man enough to stand up against me? Or look at you, you little shrimp. I'm going to pump you up." And then he trains him to the mountaintops with Arnold for several years, learning the ways of karate, taekwondo, jitsu from Italy. And then once he comes back, he's now super duper buff and can lift 10,000 suns, and he gets the girl of his dreams. There you go. I just explained my Gary Stu protagonist with a backstory. And that backstory is complete bonkers. It's just, sure, I explained what happened to him through backstory, but that doesn't really excuse the fact his feats are so unbelievable. I mean, it just doesn't. But Batman's feats are realistic. Barely. They're just barely. They are grounded within realism, but, I don't think a single human being has ever quite reached, Batman's level. In order to reach those levels, you have to be rich. You have to have an insane sleep schedule. You have to be really intelligent to be able to, learn all those martial arts, all the different languages of the world, to study as much as Batman has done. The individual traits are in realism, but when you combine them all together, no, this guy, he could do pretty much anything, and it is ridiculous. And again, sure, you can explain it through backstory, but to me, that's not really a good reasoning for why someone isn't a Mary Sue, because again, Saitama and that, the protagonist I just mentioned, who, I guess I'll just call him Gary Stewart, get it, haha, puns, Gary Stewart. So Gary Stewart, the guy I just brought up, they have backstories, but that doesn't change how ridiculous their stuff is. I realize I'm rambling and this probably doesn't make a lot of sense, but what I'm trying to get at here is, sure, you can try to explain it with backstory, but I just proved why that doesn't objectively absolve a character from being a Mary Sue. So, Saitama, he had a backstory that justified it, but it is ridiculous even in the show's logic when the characters themselves say that the idea of him reaching those levels with exercise is stupid. You can't make the argument that it works within the logic of the world, because it really doesn't. Oh, but but that's just how science is. We don't always know everything, and I guess, but again, it's even by the standards of One Punch Man, Saitama's feats are established to be super duper ridiculous. So I don't know. I just don't buy the idea. I'm sorry, guys. So yeah, this is why I disagree with what the guy said. He did that video on Ray. Why I disagree with him on the idea that a backstory objectively resolves someone from being a Mary Sue, because it doesn't. the backstory itself can be ridiculous, and even if you consider the backstory, even if you take that into account, does it change the fact that this character can do tons of things that few other people can do, so much so that it might as well be unrealistic? I don't know. There's also the fact that Rey's own stuff is explained in the film. Oh, well, it's just, oh yeah, to go back to another point, something that really got on my nerves when I saw that guy's video on Rey. He says that, oh, Poe Dameron would have a hard time making that shot with that maneuver with the Millennium Falcon. Dude, are you going to provide any sources for that? How do you know? All that Rey had to do was stop the engine and get the Falcon to rotate so Finn could take the shot. That is not hard. And, even if I believed you that it was hard, you still have provided no proof that Poe would have a hard time to do it. In fact, as far as we know, if Poe is that good, then pulling off that kind of flying maneuver should be child's play for him, especially since the film itself does establish him as a fantastic fighter. So you are talking out of your butt when you say that Poe would have a hard time to do it, when you never provide any examples to prove that point. Sorry, I had to get that out of my system. I really got off topic. Let's get back to the video at hand.
So of course they're going to be overpowered. Of course everything's going to be about them. And of course they're going to have like a really crazy design. But improvement is inevitable, and if you just let that kid be, they're going to realize like, okay, maybe I should give my character actual flaws because that's going to make the story more interesting. And maybe I should tone it down with the rainbows, and maybe I should give her a different backstory other than her parents died. Which also, parents dying is not a backstory that instantly guarantees a Mary Sue. If that were the case, every superhero ever created is a Mary Sue.
Okay, not every superhero ever created, but by that logic, Spider-Man would be a Mary Sue. It wasn't his parents, but it was a father figure. So by the logic, oh no, his Uncle Ben died, then Peter Parker would be the biggest Mary Sue of all time, which we know is far from the truth if you know a single thing about the character.
Okay, like, let's be real here. Let's be real. I mean, I'm not saying that superheroes aren't Mary Sues by some of y'all's definition. But with my definition, Mary Sues, they aren't Mary Sues. But
Wait, what is your definition? I think I missed that part if you mentioned it.
Definition? But with my definition, Mary Sues, they aren't Mary Sues. But the thing is, if you leave a kid alone and you don't tell them that their character is a Mary Sue, they're gonna improve. You don't need to tell them, oh, this is a bad character. But the thing is, if you do tell them that it's a Mary Sue, that, like, puts a big flag on their character. It, like, labels it as this, like, horrendous creature. And they're gonna be, and it's gonna, like, stifle creation. They're not gonna want to work on it, and they're gonna feel just awful about themselves because they created this Mary Sue.
I agree, especially in the case of younger creators. So, again, there's nothing wrong with giving feedback, but, I feel like that sort of thing should kind of wait until the kids are more mature and able to handle it, because, when you're younger, you don't really have the brain development to handle the onslaught of emotions that come with puberty. So yeah, to me, I think we should just sort of let younger creators do what they want. And of course, of course they should be, if they're willing to take feedback, then that's fantastic. But, I just think we should be more empathetic and mindful of the fact that these are young creators and how they just want to have fun and do stuff.
But I think that every cool character starts out as a Mary Sue. Like the famous example, Harry Potter. Harry Potter was pretty much a Mary Sue. And he probably started out as even more of a Mary Sue before not J.R.R. Tolkien. J.K. Rowling developed him more and created him into this amazing character. And the thing is, like, the thing about Mary Sue's is, I cannot fathom why people feel the need to tell people you made a awful character, stop what you're doing, because if you just let kids be kids, let kids be kids. I could say that a million times a day. Let kids be kids. If you let the kid be a kid and create all the characters they want, they're gonna get more practice creating Mary Sues than they will be if you tell them that's a Mary Sue. The characters they want, they're gonna get more practice.
They're gonna get more practice creating Mary Sues than they would if they didn't create anything. Not that they're gonna get better at making Mary Sues. I think that makes sense to an extent. They still, I still think that they should be willing to improve if there are legit problems, but yeah, I do mostly agree with what you are saying.
Is creating Mary Sues than they will be if you tell them that's a Mary Sue. Stop it. Okay, they're gonna improve faster making Mary Sues than they are like skittering over this idea that nobody's really defined. Like, I remember as a kid creating characters, I was terrified that my main OC was a Mary Sue, to the point where I didn't even show anybody this character because I was so scared they were gonna call her a Mary Sue. And to be honest, she really was a Mary Sue. But now I really like her, and she has like a lot of flaws in character development, and I got rid of her dichromatic eyes. Don't laugh at me, okay? See, it's like you're building in fear to these poor children that are just trying to make characters, and it's not helping anyone. I see a lot of people, I'm not saying like don't critique people, because when people ask for critique, I think that should be valid. And you may do things like, hey, I really like your character, but you might suggest changing this, and this is a bit cliche, but good work, like actually putting yourself out there and doing these things. Let kids be kids, and remember that improvement is inevitable and anything can be done right.
Can't wait for members of the Objectivity Squad to say, oh, just grow up, get a backbone or whatever, and being rude and things like that. But, maybe that's just me projecting my saltiness a bit. But yeah, to get to, expand more upon what I just said, there are some people that will say, grow up, just get a backbone or whatever. Well, the thing is, we're not saying, well, at least I'm not saying that you should sugarcoat it. It's a weird balancing act. I don't think we should just tell kids to, I don't think we should, my problem with saying stuff like, oh, grow up and get a backbone is that, you're kind of not putting yourself in their shoes. You're not kind of, you're not being empathetic. You're not understanding what it must be like and how hard it is for them to create it. They spend a lot of time and hard work on this character only to receive the feedback that it apparently wasn't very good. It's not always easy, so it's not so much sugarcoating it as it is just phrasing it better. As in, instead of saying, wow, your character is such a Mary Sue, instead you explain things like how, oh, well, this part kind of doesn't make sense. Could you explain this part, please? And if you do X, Y, and Z, then the character could be pretty cool, Keep up the good work. In that second example, I didn't sugarcoat anything. I just explained everything I had in a more optimistic way. I explained the ways that I would have personally improve the character, give some suggestions, and, that's how you give criticism without, that's how you give criticism in a more empathetic way, in a way that, that people will be more receptive to. And I kind of wish that form of criticism would be more common.
So even if the character sounds awful to you, don't be mean. That's what it comes down to. I think that calling things Mary Sues are mean, and I think that the more Mary Sues that people create, the better they will get at creating characters. And also, I think that the most awesome characters started out as Mary Sues, and if somebody had gone back and told those people, don't do that, that's a Mary Sue, then we wouldn't have all these stories. Like, we wouldn't have, and I'm scared to name things because y'all will probably be like, well, I think the world would be better off without that particular story. Am I right? Cringy. Anything can be done right. Improvement is inevitable. Let kids be kids. make more Mary Sues. Thank you.
And that is the end of her video. So all in all, I think this video is, all things considered, this video is actually pretty solid. I know I brought up a lot of grievances earlier, but in all honesty, I actually do agree with what she has to say, you know? I mean, you know, or no one's going to start off great, so, you know, just create and get out there and be willing to do things. And I think that might be all I have to say, you know, just, you know, just, it's just with the whole thing about Mary Sue's and original characters, I feel like when you label characters with that, you're unintentionally limiting creativity. You're sort of limiting what people can do. There's nothing wrong with a character that can do exceptional or talented feats. You know, if a character is poorly written, then just say they're poorly written. Don't call them Mary Sues. You know, anything can be a Mary Sue if it's executed poorly. But anything can be a great character if it's done well. It's all in the execution, you know? And really, it just comes down to what I think Red brought up in Trope Talks.
Now, there are a ton of other Gen 2 strains, but they all have one thing in common. The story still only exists to serve the image of the character, just like it did the Gen 1 Sue. No matter the skin, the Mary Sue makes the story boring around them. A story with a Sue at its core is written as though the Sue is the center of the universe. We're supposed to accept at face value that they're the most interesting, most important character in the story, because that's the starting point of their character. Not their backstory, not their motivation, just how invested we're supposed to be. And I think fundamentally that's what makes a Sue a Sue. It's not something that exists on the level of a character trait, but on the story level. It's how the plot flows around them. The error is that the author starts from the premise that this character is by default the best character. Not the most paragon, not the most powerful, but the best. The one everyone sees themselves in. Or at the very least, the one everyone wants to pay attention to. And that's the problem. When you start from that premise, you forget to write the character in a way that draws us in. When you start with the idea that of course the character is the center of attention, we, the audience, won't ever actually internalize why they should be the center of attention. It's writing with a blind spot, and that blind spot isn't going to be filled, and that pulls us out of the story. And this is the problem that transcends fanfic and starts to enter the world of original writing. Anytime the writer is too busy squeeing over a character to establish why we should care about them, it ends up feeling a little too self-congratulatory. But the problem doesn't stop there. The Mary Sue distorts the world around them, changing the way characters act and reality works to put the focus on them. The Mary Sue is the center of attention at the expense of basically everything else. And this isn't always positive in story. The sympathetic Sue archetype is the character who the universe conspires to make miserable, just like the Gen 1 Mary Sue is the character the universe conspires to make look good. The Mary Sue in any of her forms is the center of everything, and that's not really going to be a compelling read, no matter how interesting her character is. And it's usually not that interesting. It takes more than a cartoonishly traumatic backstory and a laundry list of positive traits to make a character compelling. Now, to be clear, there are stories with a character at their center where the character isn't a Mary Sue. The distinction is that a Mary Sue warps the way the world works around them. Glorifying the Sue is prioritized over maintaining the established characterizations or the straight-up rules of reality. A hero might be at the center of the story, but they won't be the only important character. Luke might be the one blowing up the Death Star and saving the day, but Han's the one overcoming his personal demons and swooping in to save the kid's life at the last second, and Leia's the one sacrificing everything to get the plans to the rebellion in the first place. And we can't forget that the main drama in the story is caused by the presence of an equally fascinating villain to oppose our main trio. And that's the main false positive here. There's a difference between being the hero of the story and being the center of the universe. A Mary Sue is not a character, they're an artifact of an overly centralized story. And as a result, a Mary Sue will basically never have a good supporting cast. You can't have compelling characters and side stories in a world that's all about Mary Sue. And that's what Mary Sue is. Not just the center of the universe, but the only real thing in the universe. Everything has to lead back to the Sue. In any situation where that's not true, you don't have a Mary Sue. You might have an overpowered character or a character you don't like, but the Sue-ness is built on the fact that the story is sacrificed to make the character look good. A character in a good, well-rounded story where there's focus put on other characters and character interactions that don't center on them can't be a Mary Sue. The worst they can be is poorly written.
My thoughts exactly. Thank you guys so much for watching. Have a great rest of your day, and take care.